Hello, everybody. I have Bryan here with me today, and we're going to be talking about innovation in insurance and kind of the future of innovation. So, with that, as we get started, Bryan, would you mind giving everybody an introduction?
Yeah. So, hello, I'm Bryan Falchuk. I was in PNC for 20 years, and my last role was running claims for a carrier in the US. And then I made a switch and went to the insurtech side and got to see what it's like being in a tech startup and serving the insurance companies rather than working inside of one. And I put those two perspectives together in the work that I do today, consulting for carriers and service providers and startups to try to help us all move forward. And in my new book, The Future of Insurance from Disruption to Evolution, that talks about a situation we're all facing in this industry.
Perfect. So, going right off of that last bit of your introduction, talking specifically about your book, The Future of Insurance from Disruption to Evolution, can you talk a little bit about some of the concepts that you explore in that book?
Yeah, so the premise of it, and it's told through the stories of 7 different carriers who were really open and honest in sharing their stories. So there's case studies of things that they did. But it's this moment that we find ourselves in as an industry where on the one side, you have customers who really expect and I'd say even demand a different way of working. And especially right now, I started the book before the coronavirus pandemic hit. And so all of a sudden now we have to digitize and we have to do things remotely. And a lot of the ways that we're used to working, it's not just that they were cumbersome for customers, they're impossible today. Or maybe the service providers can't operate that way anymore. So we have to figure out new solutions. So we've got customers really pushing us to serve them differently than we always have. And we also have a new crop of startup carriers who are tech-enabled, tech-first, who are not really encumbered by some of the same things, including mindset. So they come at the insurance question with a different perspective and approach. And they're doing things in serving those customers differently in ways that not only meet customer expectations, but maybe are helping to define a new set of expectations. And for those of us in the legacy incumbent carrier side, which is the space I came from, we often feel like we're encumbered and we're handcuffed sort of in responding to those customer demands and those competitive pressures to meet them because of culture and politics and legacy systems and regulation and all these other things that are excuses on the one hand, but also very real on the other. So how do we navigate through those constraints to meet what's going on in the marketplace and becoming expected of us? And that's kind of the theme of the book, and that's what these stories are meant to do is, well, let me see how that theme, that issue played out for this carrier who is kind of like us and is facing the same or maybe more or slightly different constraints than we face. And maybe I'll learn something in their experience that tells me, oh, okay, they broke through because they did XYZ. Maybe that can help us. So it's sort of I've also written a bunch of self-help books. It's kind of a self-help book, just the self is an insurance company.
There you go. You mentioned the idea of mindset and maybe some of the cultural impacts that might have within the carrier space. Can you talk a little bit about how maybe the wrong mindset or perspective is a hindrance to innovation?
Yeah, and I think there's a few things that drive this, but one of them, and I think everyone who works in the industry can picture this moment where, you're meeting a group of people, or maybe you're out at a bar and someone asks you what you do, and you have this like, oh no, I have to say I work in insurance, and they're going to be like, oh great, and try to walk away. That was my joke. Like, we have all made this joke. Like, my joke was I met my wife when I was unemployed because that's more interesting than, hi, I'm Bryan and I work at an insurance company. But this is part of the problem. The reality is the industry is actually pretty interesting, pretty amazing, and there's lots you can do, and it enables so much in life. It enables people to own homes and start businesses and build things without having to worry about, well, what happens if something goes wrong? Like, that's actually a great thing. It may not be neuroscience, and we may not be building rocket ships to go to the moon or saving lives in a lot of people's minds, but we're enabling so much. And so this notion that it's a joke, it's embarrassing, slow, it's behind, it's something you kind of like, well, let's change the subject and talk about what you do. We're setting ourselves up for not being able to move forward because we've already painted ourselves in this box that like we're behind the times and it's not cool. Well, how can you expect to be innovative and to move ahead and be interesting when you've already told yourself that narrative. It's like you're not good enough to get anywhere. And as an industry, we got to stop doing that. And frankly, it's not a great story from a recruitment standpoint either. But we need to change the conversation about what it is in this industry for our own sakes, for the next generation of people who work here. I think that's a piece of that cultural handcuff or that cultural barrier that a lot of us face in insurance.
So, in that avenue, what, I guess, suggestions do you have for folks that might be on the carrier side for them to maybe move past that mindset and become more comfortable with technology and innovation and kind of moving in the right direction of that perception?
Yeah. Well, so the first and the easiest one, although it may feel uncomfortable, is you just stop that kind of conversation. Like, don't feel like you have to dance around it. You can work in insurance and be proud of that. And maybe taking some time to reflect on what is interesting about it or reflect on what you are enabling. I ran claims. So for us to think about, like, as procedural and difficult as it may be, sometimes those calls are heated because the customer thinks you're there to, screw them out of coverage instead of standing by them. That's not why you signed up for this job. So remembering, like, what was it that drew me here? And what are we really about? Well, we're about putting people's lives back together in the worst moments that they face. Like, that's a big purpose. So let's start by focusing on that. And then what I always tell people is, well, what are your customers telling you? And don't forget, like, you're a customer too. It doesn't mean you have all the answers, but think about your own life. Is if you were told to do this, someone was telling me today, like a 16-page paper application for life insurance is in another country, but the US is certainly guilty of this too. And then to also have to get your medical evaluation, all that kind of stuff. Do you want to do that when you're busy? And, like, think about your life. Do you have time to do that? Or you got to take time off? You have to have the person come to your office, or right now, like, people don't want people coming into their homes to draw blood, and people who do that don't want to go into people's homes. So it's like, would you even want to do that? Do you want to wait 10 days to get a paper check when you've had a loss? Or do you just want the money showing up in your bank account, like, same day or the next day, or getting Venmo'd or PayPal'd or whatever? Would you accept that from anybody else? No. So just even asking yourself, well, how do I live my life? What do I expect? And would I want to do that? So that's a good starting point. And then hopefully not come up with all the answers yourself, but say, that's just proof to me, like, I need to talk to my customers. I need to hear from them firsthand. And that includes, if you have agents or brokers, listen to them, but also you have to get to the uninsured, because those are the people living it every day. And if you're not taking that feedback, you're going to miss out on what you really need to focus on. And there's one other group that knows a lot of those answers, and it's your line staff. So, don't just pay lip service to listening to them. Actually listen to them, because they're in it every single day with all the processes that are painful, with all the customer feedback, with all the frustrations and mistakes and errors that they have to clean up because, cumbersome systems or whatever. It does seem like for a lot of carriers, there's a disconnection there where it's like, well, that person's just insert whatever their role. It's like, that person is directly connected to the market. That person knows every single day what's working and what isn't. It doesn't matter what their schooling is like or how many years of experience or what their compensation is. None of that matters. They're on the front lines. They know something. So let's open up and listen.
One last question for you, I guess, from a change management perspective, and I'm springing this one on you because it inspired for me. But when you're talking about, listening to your customers and your team and coming up with those innovative ideas, how do you manage the change when then some of that starts to come into the organization, kind of come down the pipe from, like, a new solution is coming in for you to manage your day-to-day operations and adjudicate that claim?
Yeah. Well, and look, to be honest, like, some of these technologies will be threats to people's jobs. Depends what they are and how they're used. And actually, they may seem like a threat, but they may make that person's job enjoyable all of a sudden, where it's become less so. It all depends, right? But for some change, like in claims, when drones were first coming out, every conference I went to, it was all about drones and AI. And when they opened up the floor for people to submit questions, all the questions were from people who were in the field adjusting space. And they were all like, where's my job going to be? How much longer do I have until I'm laid off? And it's like, we need both. But that's a change management problem that wasn't being managed correctly. So how do you do that, right? And I think one of those pieces is it's not just your own people who you need to manage change with, it's also your customers, because they may have changes to how they interact with you. When you listen to your customers, to your staff, this is part of what you need to listen to. And that includes the people who don't like what you're saying. It's very easy to be like, oh, they're a dinosaur. They don't, we need to move past them. They're exactly what the problem is. Fine, but that sort of lack of humility and honesty, and I know better than you and you're just outdated, means you're going to miss some pushback that could be really valuable in your change management, because those are the people you have to manage the change with, not the adopters. You know, they've got it. They're going to get on board. So are you listening to the people who don't get it? Are you bringing them into the fold? And an example, I was on a webinar this morning moderating a panel, and one of the panelists said, we actually bring those people into the pilot group. And you could see a couple of people on the panel were like, oh my God, that's a terrible idea. And I'm like, no, that's brilliant. It's not that they're going to hose the POC or the demo or the trial. They're going to give you the toughest feedback you can get. And if you end up with them on board at the end, which if you don't, something's not right with the solution, now you have people who were detractors who are actually going to be fans that are going to help you spread it to the rest of the world because they saw the light, myself included. That InsurTech I worked for, I was an early customer of. And when I first heard about it at a conference from one of the founders, I'm thinking in my head, I'm like, this is stupid. And I told everyone this when I would pitch the idea. I'm like, I didn't get it. I thought it was a terrible idea. Like, I didn't see the point. But they listened to me and they were talking through it with me, and they engaged in that conversation instead of being like, oh, that guy doesn't get it, just walk away. You have to engage with the people who don't understand if you want to move forward.
Found that with our consulting engagements too. Some of the people that push us the hardest or have maybe the most walls to being accepting to that change end up, like you said, being your biggest cheerleaders and yelling from every mountaintop that they can that this change is worth giving a try. And so we found that is, bringing those people into the fold early and truly having a back and forth in communication and actually listening to their concerns and taking the time to either address them with the why or take that into consideration as you're designing the solution. It makes it a much more smooth transition through kind of the full implementation on the back end.
Yeah, I totally agree. You're not going to win over everybody, but you also can't use that as an excuse to win over nobody.
Exactly. Oh, I like that saying. I
got to write that down.
Well, thank you so much for joining me, Bryan, and sharing your thoughts on kind of some of your viewpoints from the book, but then also these kind of taking the mindset question and flipping it on its head and giving us some ideas of how to combat that. With that, I encourage everybody that's watching to go over to Bryan's LinkedIn, check out the different books. Again, in addition to some of your insurance content, I have one of your, the Do a Day book as well on my handle. And so I would encourage everybody to give that stuff a read and a listen from some of the podcasts that you have. And thanks for joining us, and have a great day, everyone.